Hello, I'm Rachel Rudolph, the Extension Vegetable Specialist at the University of Kentucky, and this video is going to discuss high tunnel tomato transplanting. If you haven't yet watched it, please be sure to watch the high tunnel soil and site preparation video before watching this video. Now that you've prepped the high tunnel for planting, it's time to get ready to transplant your tomato crop. There are several factors to consider when deciding to transplant: weather, air and soil temperatures, the condition and age of your transplants, trellising method, and row cover. This video will provide details for each of these factors. After seeding, you should check your transplants at least once per week. After the first 3 weeks, plant growth can accelerate quickly, especially if conditions have been warm and sunny. Depending on the time of year and the weather conditions, tomato transplants can be ready to transplant in 4 to 6 weeks. Check your tomato transplants and see if they are ready. The root ball should be well formed. You should be able to gently but firmly pull the plant out of its cell without the root ball falling apart and losing potting soil. The stems of your transplant should be at least 5 millimeters in diameter with several true leaves. Even though a high tunnel is a protective environment, temperature and weather conditions outside still matter. Weather in the springtime in Kentucky can be highly variable, with highs in the 80s and lows in the 30s. Check the 10-day forecast for the time you are planning to transplant. Have a plan A, B, and C for transplant days. The minimum temperature for tomato without causing cold-related stress is 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Of course, tomato can survive at lower temperatures, but exposure to temperatures below 60 can stress the crop. This stress can be exhibited a number of different ways, including visible cold damage on leaves, longer days to maturity and harvest, or nutrient deficiencies. Extreme or prolonged stress can cause lower marketable yield and poor crop development. Remember that on a sunny day, temperatures in the high tunnel can easily be 10 to 20 degrees warmer than outside. But at night, the high tunnel is not that much warmer than it is outside. If the temperatures at night are going to be below 50 degrees, have a plan to close the high tunnels and use row cover. Up to 1 week before transplanting, remove your tomato seedlings from the greenhouse and put them outside to harden off. Ideally, there would be a gradual exposure to more sunlight, more wind, and less than ideal temperatures, meaning each day you would increase the amount of time that your transplants are outside and exposed to sunlight. Being outside during the hardening off phase may mean that these transplants will need to be monitored more and watered more compared to when they were in the greenhouse. Be sure to bring plants back in during severe weather or cold temperatures. Hardening plants off helps acclimate them to outdoor conditions, strengthens them, and reduces the risk of transplant shock. It is not uncommon to have a few transplants die within the first week of transplanting, but allowing plants to properly harden off first will reduce plant loss. Before transplanting, be sure that the tomato seedlings have been recently watered. This will help reduce plant wilting and stress while transplanting. Also, run the irrigation in the high tunnel a day or two before transplanting to moisten the soil. I usually do not like to have the irrigation on while we transplant because it can get muddy and make transplanting slower and messier. If soil has been properly prepared beforehand, there should not be the need to dig big holes and disturb things too much while transplanting. I like to use the trowel to move the soil aside, place the transplant in, and move the soil back around the transplant. Since we use weed mat, I try to minimize bringing soil up and over the weed mat to reduce the mess. Once all tomatoes have been transplanted, turn on the irrigation and let it run until the soil is properly moist. Determinate tomatoes are often trellised using the Florida weave method. For this, a stake or post is placed every 2 plants. Twine is woven through the plants and then wrapped around the post for stability. The twine does not need to be added until plants are a foot to 18 inches tall. When placing the post, make sure they are tall enough and strong enough to support your fully mature tomato plants. When fully mature, these plants can be at least 5 feet tall. The post will need to be taller than that. It is easier to put the posts in before transplanting to avoid damaging plants. Be careful not to puncture or cut the drip tape while driving the posts in the ground. Indeterminate tomatoes are best supported with twine, which is tied onto the high tunnel frame above and extends down to the plant. Be sure your high tunnel is capable of supporting the weight of these fully grown tomato plants. Have row cover on hand and be ready to cover the tomatoes if temperatures drop. We put the row cover inside the high tunnel on the side, ready to go just in case. We use the posts that are for trellising to support the row cover like a giant blanket. This does require a larger piece of row cover that extends the height of the posts on all sides. This method allows the tomatoes to continue to grow, and we do not have to readjust anything along the way. Another method is to place temporary hoops throughout each row to prop up the row cover over the tomato plants. With this method, the row cover can be much smaller, slightly wider and longer than each row, and it's lower to the ground. The potential drawback is that the tomato plants can begin to outgrow the hoops, making it more difficult to protect the plants from the weight of the row cover. A quick recap of the things to keep in mind for transplanting a high tunnel tomato crop, specifically in the spring. Check your transplants and have a few potential transplant dates in mind depending on the temperature and the weather forecast. Harden plants off before transplanting. Make sure plants and soil are moist before transplanting, and have a plan for trellising and supporting row cover. Resources include Vegetable Crop Extension and Research website and UK ID36 Vegetable Production Guide for commercial growers. Funding is provided by the USDA Extension Implementation Program.